Hello, this is Christiane Piano, and welcome to your Reset Reflection. This week's episode is all about connection. And one of the reasons I'm recording an episode on connection is because in today's world, there's an alarming amount of people who are becoming aware of just how disconnected they are. In the BodyMind well-being conversation, we refer to this as the BodyMind split. And it kicks off a very challenging experience in people's lives. I'll be speaking to that in a moment, but I just want to invite you for a moment to reflect on your relationship to vulnerability. Do you like it? Do you not like it? Do you avoid it at all costs? What are your associations? What's the first thought that pops into your mind when it comes to vulnerability? Not conceptually, your personal experience. Do you allow yourself to be vulnerable? When and with whom? Do you notice any emotions that may be present associated to vulnerability? What happens with your posture? What happens to your breathing? Do you notice any physical sensations just at the thought of vulnerability in general, or a particular memory you have of being vulnerable in the recent past? So interestingly enough, prior to recording this session, I looked up the definition in the Oxford Dictionary of vulnerability. And to my great surprise, or not really, it states that vulnerability is a quality or state of being when one is exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. And I find that definition to be only partially true. When one is vulnerable, yes, one can be exposed to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. But there's a whole other side of the story. Vulnerability allows for connection. Because for connection to be possible, we need to be open. When each of us is born into this world as infants, we are little blobs of bliss, completely open, which makes us each, upon entering this world, also simultaneously extremely vulnerable. So you can imagine, depending on the environment you grow up in, and the responsiveness or the lack of responsiveness of those who were responsible for your care, you develop at a very young age a connection to being open and vulnerable. And you carry it throughout your life until you begin to notice patterns and connections of behavior in relationship to being open, which can imply vulnerability. But we're going to talk today about trying on being open and vulnerable to explore deeper levels of connection within contexts in which you feel safe to be with yourself first in exploring, and then perhaps with others. So you can try it out and begin to get a taste of what openness with implied vulnerability leads to which will increase the richness of the experience of your life. So, back to the body-mind split. You see, many people today understand that there is a close connection between the body and the mind. I mean, you as a listener, I would imagine you understand that there's a close connection, don't you? The challenge is we mostly don't live what we understand. Instead, we think of ourselves as a personality with a body, as if they were separate. And you see, it is this misperceived separation that is the source of much of what we all struggle with in our personal and professional lives. Learning to tap into wholeness requires working with body and mind simultaneously. Now, I personally practice on myself and with the people I work with, combining different modalities of body movements and interactive dialogue to allow people to explore, to uncover, and to experience for themselves wholeness. As wholeness is not just living free of pain. It is living from beyond the misperception of the separation. You see, for the most part, our difficulties occur when expectations and realities clash. You know, when things don't go as you had planned. You know what I'm talking about? But the challenge is we often are not even aware that we had those expectations. Yet, in either case, aware or not, when we find ourselves resisting a situation in which we find ourselves, this will then manifest as patterns of stress that accumulates over time. The common name for this pain, which can be either physical or mental, or both, is an energetic blockage, either surface or subtle, lodged in both the body and the mind, and is often accompanied by an emotional discomfort. So you can see, perhaps, in the experiences that you've had that were challenging, if you have not taken the time to digest them, then they become stuck down in the body and are just sitting there, and they block energy from flowing. In the body, we experience resistance as a tightness or a knot. In the mind, we experience it as a problem or a situation that we believe should not be as it is. But actually, though we might experience it more strongly in one form or another, it is the same stuckness, or what I refer to often as a knot. Both the K-N-O-T, that stuckness in the body, and the N-O-T, the stuckness in the mind. Something is that should not be, or something is not that should be. And it's present in both body, mind, simultaneously. Well-being and wholeness follow from the release of these knots and an awareness of where they came from. So how can you go about beginning to explore your knots? Well, in the comfort of a safe space, you can begin to travel down deep into your body and feel what is to be felt. Taking baby steps and deep breaths, and hopefully being in conversation with someone who you trust, who will listen, and perhaps even mirror for you to support you in discovering the deep connection between the knots in the mind and your knots in the body, and then lead you through a process to release this stuckness with compassion, gentleness, and making sure that you remember that you are in the driver's seat of the pacing and of the intensity, and to pause whenever you feel it's necessary. When we look at the world today, as I spoke to in the episode on reflections on emotions, we are seeing a disproportionate amount of body-mind disorders. And if you talk to people today, you will hear them talk about their struggles and the challenges in navigating the modern world. And I know a lot of people who are trying really hard to support themselves. Because most people want to be well. Most people want to be living their one and precious life, not just surviving and getting through to the day-to-day. But how do you actually go about doing that? Well, it requires getting underneath the surface. It requires being willing to be honest with oneself. And that takes courage. It's not necessarily comfortable. But when you can be open and vulnerable with yourself and explore openness in your body, you begin to explore and come upon places within your body that you didn't even know you had. Stuckness that's just been sitting there. And the natural state of the body is not stuckness. So it takes a lot of energy for the body to stay in a state of tension. And as you breathe deeply, the best you can, into the stuckness that you weren't even aware was sitting there, you begin to feel a release that comes from a softening. And that softening naturally leads to opening. And if your association with vulnerability is that it's exposing you to something harmful, then you see we have a bit of a conundrum. Most people today are guided mainly and disproportionately by their mind. And so to learn to listen to one's body is a journey. And to learn to come from one's body in their life is a journey. And since the mind tends to be in overdrive today, it takes something. And it often requires a slowing down. Whenever we try on something new, it is necessary, especially if it's something that is going to require us to access deeper levels. It will require a slowing down. And when you work with the internal organs, you need to be very mindful to work slowly, because they do not like fast. The musculoskeletal system likes fast. But the body is not just made up of the musculoskeletal system. So depending on the layer upon which you're working, you will need to adjust the speed, and it will require different modalities. And what that looks for you and what's appropriate for you for whatever you're going through and moving through in your life, well, it will need to be adjusted over time. You see, when you get comfortable in being in your body, and depending on the context, being appropriately open and vulnerable, then you will be able to explore this in your closest relationships. Because it isn't until we learn to be open and vulnerable with ourselves that we will then be able to be open and vulnerable with others. And the connection, the levels and the layers of connection with oneself and then with others is so life-giving. It takes your breath away in the most beautiful of ways. So yes, on the one hand, in certain contexts, being vulnerable does expose you to the possibility of being attacked or harmed, either physically or emotionally. But at the same time, it can also open you up to a whole nother layer of richness and deep connection with yourself and others. So if you are interested in exploring your connection to openness and vulnerability, feel free to reach out to me. I'm offering a 3-week series in May called Blossom. You can check it out at www.christianepiano.com. Be an opportunity to explore being open and blossoming, because blossoming doesn't happen unless you're willing to be open. And your willingness to be open is directly correlated to your relationship to vulnerability. So, you'll probably have to listen to this reflection more than once to really explore not just the content of what I speak to, but the experience it for yourself in your life. So I do hope you found this episode supportive. Feel free to share it with anyone that you know that you think may be interested or you think may feel supported by it. And as always, I love to hear back from you on how it resonates with you. Feel free to follow so more people have access to this conversation.